Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode on Conversations in the Future of Work. I am your host, Rachel Cossar, and today we're talking about a subject that I find to be so relevant and fascinating, and that is, how can we be more human in a world that seemingly is driven by AI? And today on the show, we have an expert in many fields, but I'm very pleased to introduce JeanAnn Nichols, who will be speaking with us about her opinions and her experiences as a leadership coach and executive coach in some of these intersecting spaces. JeanAnn, over to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I'm really delighted to be here. And thanks everybody for listening in. I started my career as an engineer on the factory floor, wearing a bunny suit and creating computer chips, and progressed through many different functions to be a vice president and general manager at Intel Corporation. But there was a turning point there where I decided to leverage my people skills, which is a bit unusual as an engineer, in helping other people develop their own leadership. And so I pivoted from technology into executive coaching. And I teach at Stanford, and I've just authored a book called Intentional Power. So you can learn more about me at the website. Rachel, I'm sure we'll put a link in the notes.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll circle back at the end too, JeanAnn, to just get whatever the takeaways are for people in terms of getting in touch with you. Yeah. So let's start with this first question. JeanAnn, when we first connected, you shared a really interesting story about your own experience with truly impactful coaching and how that inspired you a little bit to kind of course or change your own course. So I'd love to hear if you want to share with the audience a little bit about that personal experience you had.
Absolutely. And I think this was really a key turning point in my career. There was a person who left the company suddenly, and he was running a large part of business. He was a man, he was a vice president, he was over 6.5 feet tall. And they came and said, "Hey, JeanAnn, would you move over and take on this business?" It was more than twice the size of the business I had been running. And I was really worried about the execs just kind of getting rolled over. It was just little old me. And the guy who was leaving was just so much larger than life. So I asked for an executive coach because I wanted to show up in a way, vice presidentially, as you would need to do. And I had this coach. I probably wrote the best development plan I'd written in my career. I revitalized the team. We grew the business by $1 billion a year, from $5 billion to $8 billion over 3 years. And it really changed the way I showed up. It changed the way I saw myself as a leader. It changed even physical things about the way I move and speak, and certainly changed the way others saw me. And of course, I was promoted to vice president and, continued to have great success through my corporate career. But it was really remarkable to me. And I thought, when I get done running business, I want to learn how that magic happened, because that executive coaching just seemed so unusual to me. I just didn't understand it. So I went and got coaching certification for individuals and for teams. And so I've been practicing as an exec coach since then. And it is so rewarding. It's kind of that move from success to significance for me, where now I get to help others, especially women in the tech industries or technical fields, to live up to their full potential.
Right. And you said something that I think's really interesting and important in this kind of transformational change that it sounds like you went through as a leader, but there's so much in the actual, like the way you actually show up, right? Like that physical expression of who you're becoming as a leader. Like, can you share maybe a little more about like what that actually felt like?
Yeah, I think there are kind of 3 things to it. It's like, what are you saying and how are you saying it? Being really attentive to the fact that you're playing a role in someone else's story, right? It's really not about me anymore. And what that does is it shifts you off of sort of that imposter syndrome. They're going to figure out I'm not good enough, or, I don't know what I'm doing. When you realize you're playing a role and you need to show up in a certain way, it changes how you think about things. And then physically thinking about, where am I placing myself in the room? almost like an actress on a stage, right? Where do I need to be to have the impact I want to have with this conversation? I can tell a couple of little stories. I used to, when I knew I was going into a staff meeting, my boss always sat in the same place in the room. If I knew someone was coming in with an attack against my team, I would sit next to my boss. So we were, shoulder to shoulder on the same side of the table. So when that attack came across, it was almost like it was coming at both of us, not at me directly, right? We're on the same team.
Yeah.
We're shared here.
Right.
And when I knew someone was going to propose something that might be detrimental to my team, I would sit directly across from my boss.
Mm-hmm.
So that when the topic came up, he couldn't help but see me saying, wait, let me raise a concern here.
Yeah.
Right. If I'd been beside him, he might have been able to overlook me, but when I was directly in his view. And so there are physical things you can do in a room that I know from your background that, can really change how you show up. And just those placements actually improves your posture, and that improves your voice. Right. And so that's just a small story about how you can use your physicality in the way you show up.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that story. I think like table positioning and table power is not talked about enough, but it's really like you can change something into a feeling that's more confrontational or allied, or same team opposite team, like and it really does make a difference. The interesting thing, of course, now that we have to figure out is like, how do those dynamics translate over video? And in some ways, video is a bit of an equalizer,
Yes.
because everyone has the same kind of square rectangle real estate, right? But then there are other things, like if you're talking and squares move around as a result. So there's still some strategy behind it, I think, but it's a little different.
It's interesting, if I can share one other
Yeah.
small thing. Globally, certainly the coaching that I went through really helped me in a lot of different cultures.
Mm.
So when you think about being the boss, when I would travel, and this works also on video, when I would travel and I was the boss's boss's boss showing up, my natural inclination, I'm really a people person now, and I would really enjoy meeting the people on the ground, and I'm very independent. So I would just grab my bag, and walk to the hotel, or, and my people say, time out, JeanAnn. In China, for example,
Mm.
we really respect hierarchy. You cannot be seen schlepping your bag down the street. You'll take a car from the airport to the hotel, and you can't just walk in and glad hand everybody. You need to be still and create some distance. And again, that physicality comes in, and it works on video. I heard one time, when you think about expressing that presence and a little bit of distance, because that's what is going to let people trust you. They trust you're in charge, and then they can do their work more easily.
Yeah.
So on video, then I might imagine I have a crown on my head. It creates stillness, and stillness conveys power.
Yep. Right. Absolutely. I mean, the composure of being grounded and not fidgety, right? Like a nervous energy can really come out in these interesting ways non-verbally, and can really influence other people's perception of your authority.
Absolutely.
Right. So yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating. All right, let's move on to the next one. So as technology becomes more and more human-like, right? I mean, so many people are floored by the advances in the past few months. Like, how do we invest in developing ourselves as leaders and communicators, and like kind of tapping into our own humanity?
I love this question. And I agree with you. The generative AI and a lot of the tools are getting better and better. And we're investing a lot in those. But we also have to invest in being better humans. One of my clients recently told me, technology is easy. It's the people that are hard, right? And one of the reasons people can be hard is we have now 5 generations in the work environment at the same time. And they're very different, right? Millennials and Gen Zs are the most diverse generations that we've ever had on the earth. And they have to work together with boomers and everyone else. So getting greater skill at people skills, and I call them power skills, can help you be an exceptional leader. There's an HR analyst, Josh Bersin, and he says, hard skills are soft and soft skills are hard.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say hard skills, technologies, subject matter expertise,
Yeah.
the hard skills, they change all the time. There are new innovations that appear and obsolete other things. So they're actually soft because they're changing, and they're actually relatively easy to learn. But soft skills, people skills, they're actually hard. They're difficult to build and maintain. They're really hard to master. They're really critical for success, and they're enduring, right? Modern work gets done by teams. And so these soft skills are really our power skills. They let us express our humanity with intention, include other people, and really achieve greater results.
Right. Yeah, I do love that. I've heard that before, like that translation from soft skills, which can sometimes be perceived as less than or not as important as, to
Yes.
power skills, right? Because if you also look at the way people are promoted, right? Oftentimes the ability to communicate and articulate and inspire and influence, those are all things that can really help you move to a different place in the organization. But I think, and I also do think that this is where great coaching comes into play, because it's really not like a one size fits all approach, right? Like not everyone's going to communicate in the exact same way. You have to find that authentic voice to then be compelling as a leader or as a communicator. And that, I think, is what is also like so interesting about the difference between the AI and the human, right? Like that human's always going to have their own unique set of experiences to draw from, whereas the AI will have been trained across, whatever subset of data. So it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about.
Well, and it's interesting to see how these large language models, their predictability improves. Like in situational awareness, we call it, or situational leadership. How good do they get at adapting and predicting to what could happen next based on the signals that they're getting?
Right.
I think human to human, we have a great deal of intuition. And as efficient as we make our models and as many calculations as they can do, I think it's going to be a long time before we really get to the sort of empathy and humility that's required to have the human interactions.
Yeah, right. Definitely. I also wonder if there's, so with at Virtual Sapiens, we just included some generative AI, like feedback for content, right? So like give us some suggested rewrites to make this sound more empathetic, or give us some suggested rewrites to make this more concise. And one thing I noticed, before we started really refining the prompts, was that the answers they were giving were very similar from one situation to the next. Valid answers in general,
right?
But not valuable enough initially, right, to have it be all that meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting, the interplay of these different things. So when I was teaching a class at Stanford and writing this book, we came up with a modern leadership model we call HEARTI, HEARTI, and it's humility, empathy, accountability, resiliency, transparency, and inclusivity. So there are a lot of facets, and I think some of our large learning models have sort of gaps, right? They're not even across that sort of picture of what are the core power skills that humans have to engage with each other.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So continuing to just tap into those power skills, I think, is a very it's critical.
Right. And I think it's not just because of Gen AI, but the whole world is changing, right? We have leaders that kind of are tyrants, right? They're all about getting the work done. They don't demonstrate any humility or empathy to their people. And what happens is they burn themselves out, they burn their teams out. They might get the results, but there's a lot of consequences on the negative side.
Yeah.
And we have other leaders on the other end of the spectrum. I call them cupcakes and kisses leaders, who are all about caring and sharing and encouraging, but they don't hold their people accountable. Right. And so then it negatively impacts the performance of the whole team and maybe the company. Right. So this is not this comes back to the Gen AI and that flexibility that it needs to be able to show, because the situation doesn't work the same every time.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah, those are such great examples. So what advice do you share, kind of following on that thread, with leaders who are faced with this constant world of change and disruption?
Well, I think there are two kinds of disruption. One hand, there is these shifts in the people environment as leaders. Expectations of leaders are changing, and the employee base is changing. And on the other hand, there's a lot of environmental shift, right? That's technology and politics, and a lot of conflicting demands from employees or investors, communities, consumers, right? There's just a lot more of that stakeholder management that needs to get done.
Yeah.
So on one hand, I think this intention of pursuing 3 Ps: people, planet, and profits. But if you don't take care of your people, you're not going to grow your business. If you don't manage the planet, your impact on the planet, your costs are going to rise. And if you don't have profits, you're not going to be an ongoing entity, right? So I think on one hand, that change is like, I need to now pay attention to a lot more things than I did in the past.
Right.
And you might add a 4th P, which is purpose. Is like, why am I doing this? Is really essential.
Right.
But when we come back to how do we deal with the constant change, I have a little game that I came up with, and I wrote a blog on this. It's called the what if game, right? It's kind of, there's research that shows if we plan how to prevent or mitigate a disaster or a stressful scenario, by thinking through the decisions we would make when the disaster happens, even if it's not the thing we predicted, our brain is actually wired to cope without stressing and without stopping, right? The fight, flight, freeze. You don't get the amygdala hijack.
Yep.
And so I invented this game with my kids, but it really works in a business situation. It's called What If, right? It's a pre-mortem. So imagine we have, a big IT systems, modernization going on, and what could go wrong? Like, imagine it failed, right? And so we literally did this with my team. What if someone can't log on in the new system? We were doing an access and entitlement upgrade. And they're like, oh, well, we've trained customer service, right? Okay, what if 1,000 people can't log on? Oh, well, we've got a contract with an outside vendor, right, to bring in more customer service agents. But, like, what if 100,000 people can't log on? Okay, now we realize we need to invest in, a software bridge, because once we moved to the new system, we couldn't fail back, but this idea of going through what could go wrong, what else could go wrong, is a way of building resilience, right? And that increases your confidence that you have some kind of a backup plan that's going to enable you to, survive some kind of stressor. It also works for things that are really positive, for things that are really good. And so when we think about, all that change, you don't want to only think about the negative consequences of change. What about the positive? What could go incredibly right?
Right.
Right. And what else? And what else? And how am I ready? If my CFO walks in with $100,000 for me and says it's, can you spend this? I want to have a plan on something that's going to bring value to the company.
Yeah.
I don't want to, in the moment, have to think of something. And so I think when we think about Gen AI and AI in general, we can think about what are the negative consequences to our modes of operation, but we can also think about what are some opportunities that we need to take advantage of.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I like that. Like it's like developing muscle.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's really interesting. I had heard of the post, you said, sorry, pre-mortem.
Yeah.
And then would you also then like pair that with like a post-mortem of like, all right, we launched, and then like what actually happened?
Right. What should we do again?
Yeah. Right. Right.
What would we, no, that one didn't work so well. And, on this IT thing, the great news is the conversion happened, and I'd spent, I don't know, $70,000 on a software patch. We didn't have to use it. Okay. So let's look at that and say, was there a different way of doing that it wouldn't have cost me quite so much money? But, in the moment, it was the right thing to do, because it gave us the confidence to go forward with that shift.
Right. Right. Yeah, right. And then it's just a constantly iterating process wherein you have the structure to meet the constantly changing kind of disruptive forces.
That's right. And that was your question here, is like, is this ongoing all the time?
Right.
And
Right.
so can I do a micro version of this,
Yeah.
for what's going to happen this week?
Hmm. Right. Yeah. No, I love that. That's such a great thing to think about.
Right. And even from a micro situation, think about, if you have
Yeah.
to drive to work or you're walking down the hall to work, what could come up this week that I want
Yeah.
to be prepared in a positive way for?
Right. Right. Yeah. No, for sure. I think again, like developing that kind of muscle around like what do I know is going to happen in terms of like a next step or a product launch or whatever. And then how do I then consider the unknown that is sure to face us?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Because the world's so complex.
Yeah.
Totally. Great. So to close up the last question, what are some of the best practices for leaders to consider in embracing AI specifically without losing, the full potential of their human workforce?
So I kind of have a couple of things here. The first one is I encourage everybody to start experimenting
Mm,
with Gen AI, whether you are doing it with written work like ChatGPT-4 or Claude or Bard or any of the tools. Bing has GPT-4 built in. Experience it for yourself, and you'll see. And I think it will like level set you. It'll ground you on where the technology is today.
mm,
But it's changing. Every week it's getting better. There are certain tools that I didn't like for the way that they were helping me um, rewrite, and now they're getting much better. So first is like get some personal experience with it. It's really not too hard. There's a
mhm.
ton of videos up on how to get started, but just learn about that. Now, embracing AI without losing your humanity. I think the foundation is starting with responsible AI, right? Of having fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security,
Mhm.
and then inclusivity, trust, transparency, accountability, right? There are actually a lot of elements of this leadership model we were just talking about in responsible AI.
Mm,
Because when you build those traits into your leaders and your culture, then the products that you develop are much more likely to incorporate those traits as well,
mm,
right? And
mhm.
so when I think about embracing AI foundationally, let's think about responsible AI. How do I make it inclusive? How do I make it transparent? How do I make it accountable? How am I accountable for its results?
Yeah.
So that's kind of on the product side
Yeah.
and the culture side. And then I think a couple tools that we use without losing your humanity. One is on accountability. Can you practice 300% accountability?
Hmm.
So not only am I accountable for my work, for my own self, but am I accountable for my systems and my systems' impact on society? So helping your employees think about how their work impacts more than themselves and their own career is a great step in saying, how do I embrace this AI without losing humanity, without losing the impact on my people? Because people want to know that they're making a difference in the
Mhm.
world and not causing harm, and they want to grow their careers. So putting those two together. So 300% accountability, I think, is
Mhm.
one.
Yeah.
I think the transparency piece is really important.
Yeah.
Being able to identify where things come from, how they were developed. We have a little model. It's the 3-step. It's like start with why it matters, what you
Mhm.
think,
Yeah.
then move to what. Here's what we know and here's what we don't know,
Mhm.
and end with how. Here's what you can count on from me, and here's what I need from you. So that transparency in communication and transparency in products you're developing is going to be really important.
Right. Yeah. So it's like there's embedded second and third um, degree kind of questioning and thinking there, right? Or
Yeah.
second and third order thinking,
Right.
right? It's similar to going to the source, right? Going to that primary source and just confirming that, like, oh, that's to your point of transparency, like that's where that came from. That, not taking everything at face value is also
And
pretty
being
critical.
accountable. You can't just like generate
Yeah.
something and just
Right.
put it up there and assume that it's,
Right.
all good.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. But no, I love the emphasis on like just get out there and play around with stuff and try things. I've heard some people earlier on the show mentioned like creating these smaller kind of nimble task forces within a larger organization just to help people experiment and,
Yeah.
you know, see what's actually interesting and relevant.
Yeah. And I think you'll see over time, sort of curated large language
Yeah.
models are much more effective, right? Do
Yeah.
they reflect your audience? We have not very much inclusivity because the web has just a lot of bias in the content and the way it's been put up. And so
Mhm.
sometimes if you curate where your models are learning, you're going to wind up with better outcomes for your people and better outcomes in your products.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
Awesome. Well, JeanAnn, thank you so much for sharing so many fantastic takeaways. And if our audience would like to get access to your book, your website, your blog, to your thought leadership in general, what's the best way for them to do that?
so you can visit my website, JeanAnnNichols.com. We'll type it out for you.
Mhm.
Um, the book Intentional Power is for sale on all the electronic booksellers, in airports and bookshops. It's available in print, in audio, and in e-reader. So whatever format you'd like from a myriad of sellers is
Awesome.
really helpful. And if you're interested in taking classes, you can look at the Stanford Continuing Studies catalog and join us because we really enjoy the engagement of live classes.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much. And thanks, of course, to our audience for joining us for another conversation in the future of work.
Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate you having me.
Wonderful.